Deuteronomy chapter 16, verse 18 through chapter 17. And there's some leadership structure things that we're going to see here today. God's saying, look, I want honest judges. I want honest courts. This is a thing where there was not supposed to be within God's covenant people a justice for the rich and justice for the poor. We talk about that in our culture, right? Even we've seen early on in this time of COVID, where as the vaccine came out, for example, just remembering the story of a rich couple who flew all the way to, it was either the Northwest Territories or Yukon or northern Canada, so that they could get the vaccine early, and they bought it so that they would get it instead of rather those for whom it was intended. Made a big story. We didn't like it. Why? Because it just feels like there's a different system for the rich than there is for the poor. That was not to be within the community of God's people. So if there was a charge that came up, an accusation of some kind, it was to be carefully investigated. Just because someone influential brought the accusation doesn't mean it's necessarily true. Just because someone who's powerless or more kind of, powerless, socially speaking, brings an accusation, doesn't mean it's automatically to be believed or disbelieved. It's to be carefully investigated. All were to be considered equal in that sense. For capital crimes, 2 or 3 witnesses, it's not just good enough. It's a significant consequence, so it's not just good enough. It's one person, 2 or 3 eyewitnesses. If the case was too difficult to be absolutely sure, then it was to go to a Levite priest or a judge, and that judge's decision was to be respected. Because if they couldn't agree on authority, anarchy was going to rule between the tribes, and it would just break down, which we kind of see when we get to the book of Judges. Then come these regulations for a king, which is interesting because there's no king right now. In fact, there's a call for there not to be a king. And here Moses gives instructions, look, if you want a king like the other nations, don't pick a king like the other nations pick. The king's not to operate like the kings of the other nations operate. Not to accumulate military or political capital, not to be concerned about making alliances here, there, and everywhere. The king's role was to be kind of like the high priests or the priests, or what the prophets were going to be. The king's role was to reflect to the nation who God was, what God has done. All three, in their own way, had a similar, and who I'm talking about is prophet, priests, and kings. Those 3 leadership roles, all in their own way, were doing the same one thing: reflecting God to the people. That's what their job was, as well as then kind of reflecting the people to God, interceding or leading in the way with what's going on with the people and bringing it before God. So that was the role of the king. As we keep going through the Old Testament, that will be the primary criteria upon which all kings are going to get judged. Did they reflect God to the people? So, leads to this question for us today. What are we looking for in our leaders? And what are we expecting of ourselves? Things like humility, for example, were qualities that only became something we sought to see in leaders as a positive quality after the time of Jesus and the influence of his teachings within the church. Are we looking for a leader who is going to protect us no matter the cost? Are we looking for a leader who is going to reflect the character of God? Are we looking for a leader who's open? We're looking for a leader who's honest. Are we looking for a leader who isn't going to take any crap from anyone? What are the biblical principles? What are the Christian principles that we should be looking for in our leaders? This is something to think about, because all too often, even today as the church, we settle too quickly for leaders who look like those of the world and the values of the world. And the message of the church is lost and suffers. Things to think about today. May the Lord bless you and keep you. May the Lord make his face to shine upon you. May the Lord be gracious to you. And today would you know his peace. God bless.